Shalom everyone, Bezat Hashem. Today in Masechet Sanhedrin we're going to learn Yudalid Amud Aleph. We're going to start about halfway down the page, Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and we'll have two sections in today's learning. The first is really a continuum from yesterday, which is halachot relating to semicha, which means rabbinical ordination in the real sense. We said one halacha yesterday about it, we'll say a second one today and then discuss that. And the second section, the bottom of the page, we'll get to, which will introduce us to the discussion tomorrow, this idea of the Sanhedrin sending members to engage in the measurement of the egla arufa. We'll speak about that at the end of the day today. Sat Hashem, our learning should be, as always, refuah shleima, merit for a speedy, quick recovery for Yaakov ben Dinah, and we should only hear B'sarat Tovot, good news, soon. Bezat Hashem, let's get started. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, just above halfway down the page. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. It's about 20 lines from the top of the page, but it's about 4 lines below Tosafot Rabbi Shimon. Now, let's remember where we left off yesterday. We left off yesterday with a discussion regarding giving smicha. Now, smicha, again, to remember, it's not really the rabbinical ordination of today. Actually, this was an ordination or rabbinical authority that was given from a rebbe to his student that authorized him to adjudicate even cases of knasot, even cases of penalties, that stretched back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So this was a very unique authorization. It doesn't exist today. And we said one halacha about this yesterday, which was there needs to be a court of 3 people in order to give over that smicha. We read a story with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We said there was also someone else there with him, but they weren't mentioned because of his honor. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi comes and tells us another halacha about this smicha, and we'll have to explain exactly what he means. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, ein smicha b'chutz la'aretz. Smicha is not given in chutz la'aretz. Now, the Gemara does not understand at face value what it means there's no smicha in chutz la'aretz. What does that mean? So asks the Gemara, "Mai ein smicha?" What does it mean there's no smicha outside of Israel? Maybe it means that there's no authority to adjudicate cases of penalties outside of Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, as we explained yesterday, in order to adjudicate penalty cases, you have to be a mumche, you have to have smicha. So maybe what it means is, even if you have received smicha, you have received this rabbinical ordination, again, on this high level of being a mumche, you're still not allowed to adjudicate cases of penalties outside of Israel. Maybe that's the pshat. The problem is Vatanan, but that's not true, because the Mishnah Masechet Makot tells us Sanhedrin, this idea of having a Sanhedrin, meaning a 23-person court that deals with capital punishment, certainly could adjudicate cases of knasot, penalties. No haget is applicable. Bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz is both applicable in the land of Israel as well as outside of the land of Israel. So we know clearly that you could adjudicate cases of knasot, of penalties outside of Israel. Again, if he has smicha, he could adjudicate cases of penalties outside of the land of Israel. Ella, so rather, what does it mean that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, Ein smicha b'chutz la'aretz? What does it mean there's no smicha outside of the land of Israel? De lo samchinan b'chutz la'aretz. This is a very interesting halacha. We cannot confer rabbinical ordination if the Rebbe and the student involved in the process are not in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, in order to confer this rabbinical smicha, this ordination, it has to be done in Eretz Yisrael. It can't be done outside of Eretz Yisrael. That's the idea. So the Gemara says, based on this, now we have to analyze who has to be in Eretz Yisrael and who has to be, and who potentially could not be in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, you have 2 parties involved in the smicha process. You have the Rebbe, or the 3 people that are conferring smicha, and you have the recipient, who's now going to be called rabbi, who could now adjudicate cases of penalties, who becomes the rabbi now. So the Gemara says like this, Pshita, it's obvious, Somchin b'chutz la'aretz, if the ones who are giving the smicha, let's say the court, the 3 people that are conferring rabbinical ordination, are outside of Israel, v'nismachim ba'aretz, and the ones who are receiving the smicha, right, the student who's coming to receive smicha, if they are ba'aretz, those students are in Eretz Yisrael, that wouldn't be effective, because amrinan delo, we already said that that's not going to be effective. Meaning, we've already said it can't be conferred in chutz la'aretz, even from a Rebbe to a student in chutz la'aretz, if they're next to each other. So certainly if the Rebbe is in chutz la'aretz and the student who's receiving the smicha is in Eretz Yisrael, he's very far away, certainly then that student would not be able to receive smicha, rabbinical ordination, in that way. But the question the Gemara wonders, Ela somchin ba'aretz, but what if the ones who are giving the smicha are in Eretz Yisrael, v'nismachin b'chutz la'aretz, and the receivers, the students, are in chutz la'aretz, mai. So would this be sufficient for the Rebbe who is in Eretz Yisrael? So he's the starting of this process, the procedure. He's giving smicha to students. The students are not here. Could he make them musmachin, make them mumchin, smuchin, even though they're not right here next to him? Or do we say no? Tachlis, they're not here right now. They're in chutz la'aretz, and he cannot confer smicha, even though he, the Rebbe, is in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara says, "My, what's the halacha in that case? Rebbe's in Eretz Yisrael, students are in chutz la'aretz. Would this type of smicha work, or can he not confer that status while the students are not here next to him in Eretz Yisrael?" So Tashma, the Gemara says, let's bring a proof from a Braita. The Rabbi Yochanan hava mitzta'er alei, the Rav Shemin bar Abba delo hava gabayu delismechei. We know Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was the big Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael. You look throughout Shas, very often you have an Amorah saying something. Many times you find it's the Amorah says this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan was of the earliest Amoraim, and he was the leader of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and he taught a lot of the great Amoraim. So very often it's a certain Amorah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rav Shem bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, because he was the Rebbe of all of these great Amoraim, or many of them, I should say. So the Gemara tells us, in order to answer this question, Rabbi Yochanan have a mitzvah alei Rav Shemin bar Abba. Rav Shemin bar Abba, who was one of his students actually, Rav Yochanan really was pained. He wanted to give smicha to Rav Shemin bar Abba, delo hava gabayu delismechei, because Rav Shemin bar Abba was not near him in order to give him smicha. So we see very clearly, in order to confer smicha, the Rebbe and the student need to be next to each other. And since Rav Shemin bar Abba was not near Rabbi Yochanan could not give him smicha even though he wanted to. Similarly, Rabbi Shimon ben Zirud v'chad de'imei, Rabbi Shimon ben Zirud and one of the people, Umanu, who was that? Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai. Fa'amrila, and others say Rabbi Yonatan ben Achmai v'chad de'imei Umanu Rabbi Shimon ben Zirud. So either the order was switched around one way or the other, which would emphasize which one is more significant. But the point is, Chad hava gabayu, the one student of Rabbi Yochanan who was near Rabbi Yochanan, Samchu, Rabbi Yochanan gave him smicha. Chad lo hava gabayu, the one who was not near Rabbi Yochanan, lo Samchu, Rabbi Yochanan was unable to give him smicha. And from this we clearly see that smicha can only be conferred if the Rebbe is in Eretz Yisrael and the student is in Eretz Yisrael. Vice versa though, if or in any other case, meaning whether the Rebbe is in Eretz Yisrael, student is in chutz la'aretz, or they're both, certainly if they're both in chutz la'aretz, smicha cannot be conferred onto that student, smicha cannot be received. Beautiful. Now the Gemara, because we're talking about giving smicha, it tells us a couple of stories now about this process. So Rabbi Chanina v'Rabbi Yoshaya. Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya have a kamishtakid Rabbi Yochanan lismechinhu. Rabbi Yochanan was very eager to give them smicha. Okay, it seems like he wanted to make more rabbis. He felt the world would be a better place. They could adjudicate knasot. They're more proficient. And he wanted to give them over the Torah Sheba'al Peh, all the things that are necessary so they can receive smicha and be called rabbi on that level. However, lo hav mistaya milta, the matter was unsuccessful. So Rashi learns that when they were by him, meaning whenever these students would come to be near him, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya, there was not a court of 3 people. And we learned earlier in the first halacha regarding smicha that you're not allowed to confer smicha unless you have a court of 3. So for whatever reason, Rabbi Yochanan didn't have a court of 3 when these students would visit, and therefore he was unable to give these students smicha. Havakamitzta'er tuva. Now this bothered Rabbi Yochanan immensely. So Amrulei, these students, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya said to the Rebbe Rabbi Yochanan, Lo nitztarmar, don't be so upset, don't be so pained that you were not able to give us smicha. This is a fascinating storyline and fascinating drasha. Let me just explain this outside before we see this inside. We know in the beginning of Shmuel Aleph, there was a Kohen whose name was Eli. And he was actually the last Kohen Gadol that was associated with the story of Shmuel. We know the story of Chana, Shmuel's mother. She couldn't have children for many years. And her husband and her co-wife, who was Penina, they used to come to the Mishkan when it was in Shiloh. And Chana would cry and daven that she should have children. We know the story, not to get too off topic, but it is a fascinating story that one time Chana was davening, the future mother of Shmuel, and Eli thought she was drunk. He said, why are you davening drunk? Eventually he blessed her because he realized he had made a mistake. But Kitzer, what happened is that Eli Kohen was the last Kohen Gadol of Shiloh, that Mishkan, when it was there, because what ended up happening was his sons, Chofni and Pinchas, they did not follow in the righteous ways of their father, the Kohen Gadol Eli, and they started to abuse their position. The Psukim talk about what they had done wrong. And because of that, what eventually ended up happening is Mishkan Shiloh was disbanded, the Aron HaKodesh was seized by the Plishtim until the days of David HaMelech, when it was able to be brought back into its appropriate place. But this took time. But the point that we're focusing on here is, because Eli's sons did not follow in his ways, and the Psukim to some degree seem to hold him liable for that too, he should have given them musar, he should have corrected their paths, the future descendants of Eli Kohen were cursed. And as we'll see from the Psukim here, the well-known curse was that the boys growing up in Eli's house, their descendants, would not grow old. It means they would die young, and the Gemara is going to tell us they would die before 18. They would die very young, Bachurim, when they were very young. Actually, the Gemara tells us in many places, including Rosh Hashanah, that some of the descendants of Eli were the great Amoraim, Rabbah, Abaye. I believe it's a discussion about Rava, and the reason that they, which we'll speak about in a moment, were actually able to live beyond this level of 18 was because the Pasuk emphasizes they won't live very old unless they're engaged in certain mitzvot, Torah, we'll see, Torah, Gemilut Chasadim, other things, and then they were able to extend it beyond the 18 years. But what's the point? These rabbis, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Shaya, saw the Rebbe Rabbi Yochanan was upset that he couldn't give them smicha. They told Rabbi Yochanan, as we'll see based on the Psukim, part of the curse of Eli, who we descend from, was that no one would receive smicha and be able to sit on Sanhedrin from his descendants. So therefore, don't be so upset, because the fact that you weren't able to give us smicha was predicted in the Psukim already, because we descend from Eli. Let's see that inside. So the Gemara says like this: Amrulei lo nitzdar mar. These students, Rabbi Yoshaya, and Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Shaya and Rabbi Chanina, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, Lo nitztar mar, don't be so upset. Da'anan mi debeit Eli katinan, because we descend from the house of Eli. Am Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Am Rabbi Yonatan, minayin she'ein nismachin lebeit Eli. Very interesting. How do we know that part of the curse was that these children of Eli, the descendants of Eli, would not receive smicha and would not sit on the Sanhedrin? Shene'emar, like the Pasuk tells us, Lo yehiyeh, this is the beginning of Shmuel Aleph, this curse. It says, Lo yehiyeh zaken bevetcha kol hayamim. That Hashem told Eli through the Navi, you will not have zaken bevetcha, an elder in your house all the days. Now, my zaken, what does it mean an elder? Ilem zaken mamash, if it literally means your descendants won't grow old, they'll die young. The problem is, v'achdib, but the Pasuk says that clearly, because it says, Kol marbit beitcha yamutu anashim. All those that grow up in your house will die as young men, which means they'll die at 18. Ela smicha. So rather, this must be saying something else. What is lo yeh zaken bevetcha? It's saying an additional curse, which is they won't receive smicha, and as Rashi explains, they won't sit on the Sanhedrin. So therefore, what the students were telling Rabbi Yochanan, this Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshaya, they were telling Rabbi Yochanan, don't be upset you can't give us smicha, because this is just the reality of how it is. We descend from Eli. Part of the curse was that we can't receive smicha, so that's just the mitziyut. Now Rashi addresses a question. He says, wait a second. The halacha is, you can't receive smicha before 18. So if the people from the house of Eli were going to die before 18, so why does there need to be an additional curse? They also won't receive smicha. That's included in the fact that they will die before 18. So he says, based on what I mentioned before, is that the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah tells us that the pasuk says, the emphasis of the pasuk is that bezevach uv mincha, that through korbanot and through appeasement of Hashem, or attempting to appease Hashem, they won't be able to atone for the curse of Eli, but in the merit of Torah and Gmilut Chasadim, which is what Rabbah and Abaye were able to utilize, they could theoretically extend their life beyond 18. So the emphasis of the pasuk then in the double curse is, even if you extend it beyond the first curse, which is you won't die by 18 because you have some sort of a special zechut of Torah and Gmilut Chasadim, nonetheless, at the same time, you're not going to receive smicha if you're from the descendants of Eli Kohen. Let's continue on now in some of these stories about receiving smicha. Says the Gemara. We're holding now Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera is about 5 lines down the wide lines. The middle lines. Rabbi Zera hava mitamer lemismeche. Now we go the other way. Rabbi Zera, he was hiding because he didn't want smicha. So he was avoiding receiving smicha. Now why was he avoiding it? To Am Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar says, L'olam havi kaval v'kayam. A person should always be in the dark and he'll live. Meaning, if you don't go out of your way to accept positions of authority or leadership, rabbanut on yourself, then you're going to live. Why? Because we know the Gemara tells us Rabbanut is mekaveret et ba'aleha. People who accept positions of authority, it causes them to be buried. Now, a simple pshat, by the way, the simple pshat is that the stresses of authoritative positions really causes a person to have years taken off of his life. It's not something that's great for long life. Stress kills. And being in positions of authority in Rabbanut, it definitely could take years off your life. There's other pshatim that are said, which is that it could lead to ga'ava and bad midot, and then that could lead to inappropriate conduct, which eventually leads to a shortening of his life. But Rabbi Zera, either way, he was avoiding getting smicha because he didn't want to be in a position of authority. But kivan desham lahad amar Rabbi Lazar, when he heard the statement of Rabbi Lazar, ein adam oleh legdula eli imkein mochalin lo kol avonotav. He heard this beautiful statement, which was, a person will only ascend to positions of authority, of greatness, if he's forgiven for all of his sins. So he said, wait a second, I want my sins forgiven. So Amtzi Le'anafsheh, he exerted himself, he strove in order to receive smicha, because he wanted it then so that his sins would be forgiven. He saw that there's a great benefit, a great pro associated, and the con isn't as significant anymore, and he strove to receive smicha. And the Gemara tells us, Ki samchu Rabbi Zera, when they gave Rabbi Zera smicha, sharu lehachi, they sang him the following song. Now this is a song they used to sing for the kalot, for the brides, but they sang it for him too because it was applicable, at least euphemistically, in regards to Rabbi Zera. They said the following: Lo kachal, she, referring to a kalab, referring to Rabbi Zera, does not need eye paint, meaning makeup for his eyes. Velo sharuk, he does not need face paint, blush, things like that. Velo pirkus, pirkus either means the hair braided or hair dye or hair washing, the things that would make a kala beautiful in addition. V'alet chen, and with all of that, still, she promotes grace. Now, in regards to the kala, the idea is, you're beautiful without makeup. It means there's a natural beauty associated. But in regards to Rabbi Zera, what they were saying is that there's such a chokhmah with this Rabbi Zera, he's so fitting of receiving smicha because of his natural chokhmah, his natural grace, as we're calling it, in association with receiving smicha. He doesn't even need those external factors. Now, the Gemara goes on to tell us other people who receive smicha and what they said in regards to those people as well. Ki samchu Rabbi Ami or Ravasi. Rabbi Ami and Ravasi received smicha. Sharu luachi, they sang to them the following: Kol min dein samchu lana. Anyone who's like this should receive smicha for us, because these are people that are really qualitatively fit for positions of smicha, for authority. But lo tismechu lana, do not give smicha for us. Lo misarmitin. Literally, sarmit is a rag. But as Rashi explains over here, it means don't give smicha to people who are like rags, which means people that they're not, it's something that's unfinished, really. It means they're not really ready, as Rashi explains here, because they can't give good reasons for their arguments. So they should not receive smicha. Velomi sarmisin, nor the people that are sarmisin. Rashi learns it's a language of sares, which is backwards. People that are backwards means they confuse the issue. They turn things around, things that are not said the way they should. Don't give those people smicha. Amril and others say what they said for Rav Amin Ravasi was lo mechamisin, not those that are thieves. A chamsan is a type of thief. Actually, the difference between a regular thief and a chamsan is that a regular thief steals, walks away. Chamsan is somebody who forces you to sell him an item, but he pays you for it. Meaning he pays you, but he forces the transaction. So, in regards to these people, what they were saying was, don't give smicha to rabbis who are like chamsanim, which means they withhold the reasons of the Torah and they don't provide it properly to the people. Velo mi tormisin, as well as don't give smicha to people that are tormisin. Now, tormisin is a legume. It's a type of a bean which is called lupines. So I had no idea what this means. I looked it up. The Art Scrolls quotes the Yad Ramah. Rashi says actually he doesn't know lo isparish exactly what the negativity here is or the lack of qualification to receive smicha is, but I saw the Yad Ramah is brought down as saying these are a type of bean that is very bitter. So don't give smicha to people that are embittered. They're not qualified to be rabbis. What's very interesting to me happens to be in this note over here is all of these things, it seems to be is that some of them at least, is they might even have tremendous chokhmah, but they can't explain things clearly. Or they're bitter, and since they're bitter, they won't be able to rub off properly on the people. This is not a chokhmah issue. This is not a lacking in wisdom. It's a different issue, an external issue, which is they won't connect well with the people. Those people should not receive smicha because they won't be able to lead in their position properly. Let's finish up this sugya. Rabbi Yavo ki havu ati mimetifta. So on this note of singing certain songs for rabbis when they receive smicha, the Gemara tells us a similar story that when Rabbi Yavo ki havu ati mimetifta lebe Kesar, when Rabbi Yavo was a great rabbi, when he would go from the yeshiva to the house of the Caesar. Now this Rabbi Yavo had tremendous qualities. Amongst them was, he was a tremendous chacham, leader of the people. He was also very handsome. So when he would walk towards the Caesar, and he also was very connected with the government, with the Roman authorities. So when he would go towards the Caesar's house, Nafki matronita de be Caesar, the noble women of the Caesar's house would open up, umisharian, and they would sing, they would sing the following praises to him. They would say, Rabba de Ameh. Literally, Rashi says it means the Nasi of the people. It means he was so great in Torah, he was the leader of his people. Medabarna de umtei. Rashi adds on over here a similar idea, which is manhig. He is the leader of his people, but in this regard, Rashi explains it means he's a leader of his people, that he's a parnes, he's an askan, he's involved in the involvements of the people, and he's close to the government, which also assists the people in that regard. Botzina de Nehura, the radiant light, because the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Avo has a tremendous beauty to him. So he has this radiant beauty that comes from him. Barich matiech l'shalam. Your arrival should be blessed with peace. So that's what they would say when he would arrive. Let's move on now to the second section, which is involved with the story now of egla arufa. Now, this was back in the Mishnah. So we really quoted these two together in the Mishnah, and that's why we're about to talk it now. We're done with smicha. But in the Mishnah, we quoted two halachot together that require 3 or 5 people. It was a machloket Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. We said smichat zkenim and arifat egla. So smichat zkenim we discussed previously, yesterday, the day before, which is the idea that when there was a par ha'elem davar shel tzibur, the chachamim paskin that something was mutar, the majority of the tzibur engaged in it, and then it turned out it was asur, then the Sanhedrin would have to bring a special bull offering. So he said that some of the Sanhedrin have to lean on it, 3 or 5, machloket Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda. Another machloket, which was also the same debate, which was arifat egla, that if you found a dead body between 2 cities, and it wasn't clear, a dead Jew, you don't know where it came from, so the city that it was closest to would have to undergo a procedure which was called egla arufa, where they would decapitate a calf in a barren valley, etc. Not going to get into it too much. But the Sanhedrin would have to send some representatives to measure which city was the dead body closest to that would have to do this procedure of egla arufa. We had a machloket how many representatives of the Sanhedrin would have to come. either the members of the Sanhedrin have to be 3, Rabbi Shimon 5 according to Rabbi Yehuda, and now we're going to go through the discussion of the sources for this debate. So Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita, it's really discussed the end of Parashat Shoftim. The Arifat egla b'shlosha says the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita. It says in the pasuk, "V'yatz'u zekeinecha v'shoftecha," your elders and your judges will go out. So it says the Braita, zekeinecha is plural, your elders is shnayim, it's 2 people. Shoftecha is plural, your judges shnayim, 2. So that would be a total of 4. Ve'ein beit din shakul. So again, in regards to measuring it, you can't have an even court. In general, that's not considered a proper thing because it has to be able to be, as we've spoken many times, you have to lean on the side of one being the majority over the others, and therefore if it's even, you can't have that. So you can't have an even number, so there has to be at least one more judge. So Rabbi Yehuda says, based on that, Zekenechas 2, Shoftechas 2, you have to have an odd number. Mele, you have to have 5, Div Rabbi Yehuda. Again, engaging in the measuring to the city that is closest to the dead body. Rabbi Shimon says, no. Zekenecha is shnayim. I agree with you, Zekenecha implies 2. Ve'ein beit din shakul, you can't have an even court. And therefore, Mosifin aleim od echad, you have to add one more. Harei kan shlosha, so we have a total of 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. And therefore, you'll have 3 people engaging in this measurement. Asks the Gemara the obvious question, Rabbi Shimon, hai shoftecha mayavid lei. But what does Rabbi Shimon use the word shoftecha then to teach us? Answers the Gemara, umi baile lemyuchadin shebishoftecha. Oh, zekenecha is for the number, but shoftecha is to teach us which judges are we actually requiring. So shoftecha is the unique judges, meaning it's not just any judges that have to engage in this measurement. You need the judges from the Sanhedrin. That's what shoftecha teaches us. Asks the Gemara, how does Rabbi Yehuda know that? So Rabbi Yehuda mi ziknei ziknecha nafka. Rabbi Yehuda says back like this. Really, I know from shoftecha the number. From the word ziknecha, I deduce 2 things. I deduce the number 2 additional, and I also deduce the unique judges of the Sanhedrin. Why? Because if it only wanted to teach us one of those drashot, it could have said ziknei. By saying ziknecha, it means not only like the simple pshat ziknei, which is plural, you would need 2, but on top of that ziknecha, you also need the unique judges. For Rabbi Shimon argues back on that. He says, you can't say such a drasha, because imi ziknei, if it only said ziknei, hava amina, I would have said ziknei ashuk. Maybe you can use general judges. Ziknei would no longer imply for us the idea that it's the significant judges of the Sanhedrin. So katav rachmana zikenecha. Therefore, the pasuk had to write zikenecha to imply its unique judges. V'iktiv ziknecha, and even if it only said ziknecha, I would have said Sanhedrin Tana. You don't need necessarily from the big Sanhedrin of 71, but you could only even have judges from the 23-person Sanhedrin. So katav rachmana v'shoftecha. Therefore, the Torah had to write v'shoftecha, meaning mimyuchadin shebishoftecha. It has to be representatives of the great Sanhedrin, meaning the Sanhedrin of 71. So now the Gemara falls back to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is difficult because you see clearly you can't deduce both drashot from zekenecha, because from that pasuk you wouldn't know necessarily they have to be the unique ones. You need shoftecha for that. Rabbi Yehuda Gamar ziknei ziknei. Oh, so the Gemara says we had a similar sugya in the previous idea of the smichat zikenim. Rabbi Yehuda says back, I have gzera shava. Ziknei ziknei. Mi v'samchu ziknei aidat yedehem. We know, previously we had said, regarding how many of the judges have to lean on the par ha'elem davar shel tzibur, the last sugya really. And we said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we know from that context that it has to be members of the Sanhedrin, according to Rabbi Shimon also. So we have a gezerah shava that connects smichat zkenim, leaning on that animal, regarding the par helam davar shel tzibur, which we know had to be representatives of the Sanhedrin Agadol, the 71-person Sanhedrin. And we have the same terminology here, which is ziknei. It also says the same terminology by egla arufa. Ma le'alan miuchadim shebeida. Just as regarding there, you need the Sanhedrin involved. Afkan miyuchadim shebezekenecha, you also need the 71-person Sanhedrin to send representatives, and therefore that's how Rabbi Yehuda actually knows, not from the word zekenecha, but from the gzerah shava, that you need of the 71-person Sanhedrin to represent. Says the Gemara, but that's difficult, because if he learns out from there, from that gzerah shava, so leilef kula me'atam. Why do you have to learn out the number of 5 now from this context altogether? since Rabbi Yehuda's position regarding smichat zkenim, the measurement, the leaning on the egla roof, on the par helem davar shel tzibur, it's 5 over there as well, and you're learning a gzera shava connecting the two themes, so you shouldn't need the words kenecha and shoftecha here altogether. So kenecha v'shoftecha lamali, if you're making a gzera shava, you should learn out that it has to be from the Sanhedrin, and the number from there. So why do I need the number now to be deduced from here? Ella, the Gemara says, as Rashi explains, really he does not learn from the gzera shava. He learns it from here inherently. And also he deduces from shoftecha the idea that it has to be miuchadin shebeshoftecha, like Rabbi Shimon says, members of the Sanhedrin. So how does he know the number 5 then? So this says the Gemara, vav de v'shoftecha leminyana. Rabbi Yehuda says, really, zekenecha teaches you 2. The vav of v'shoftecha adds another 2. But the word shoftecha itself teaches you from the Sanhedrin, and therefore you have both drashot of being from the Sanhedrin as well as the number 5. Rabbi Shimon vav lo darish, but Rabbi Shimon does not expound the vav, and therefore he's not bothered by that. Now Tosafot adds an important point here. We say he doesn't expound the vav. We find sources in Shas that Rabbi Shimon does actually expound the vav, and vice versa, that Rabbi Yehuda does not necessarily expound the vav. It means, in the context of the verses here, it's not mashma that there's a drasha to Rabbi Shimon, but it is mashma that there is a drasha from Bishoftecha, but in general there could be other shitot based on the context of other psukim. Okay, so the Gemara says beautiful. So you've shown me sekinecha, shoftecha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have 5. According to Rabbi Shimon, you have 3. The problem is if it's the plurality that teaches the additional number, there's other plural languages there. Because based on that, v'yatzu, it says they go out. That's also plural. Shnaim, add another 2. Umadadu, and they measure. Shnaim, that's another 2. So the Rabbi Yehuda, hare tisha. The Rabbi Shimon shiva comes out according to Rabbi Yehuda, you should have a total of 9 judges. Means additional 4 on top of his 5, which is 9. And according to Rabbi Shimon, an additional 4 on the 3, which is 7. So why don't you have 9 and 7 then? So the Gemara answers, Aomi baile lechetanya. Now those words, v'yatzu and madadu, is used for a different drasha, not for the number. What does it teach us? V'yatzu teaches us, hein v'lo shluchan, that the Sanhedrin has to go out themselves, either 3 of them or 5 of them, to do this measuring, not their shluchim. They can't send out representatives or shluchim messengers. They have to be members of the Sanhedrin themselves who go out to do this. And umadadu, what does measure? They measure teach us she'afilu nimtza. Turning to Yadad Amud Bet, even if nimtza be'alil la'ir, even if it's clear which city the dead body is closest to, umadadu teaches us tzarich la'asok b'mdida, that there's still a mitzvah to measure. Very interesting. They're trying to determine which city it's closest to. So one could argue, if it's clear that it's 100 feet away from one city and 1,000 feet away from the other, or 10,000 feet, it's obvious, maybe they don't even have to undergo this procedure. So that's the word umadadu teaches us. The word teaches us that even if it is clear, they should still engage in this measurement that's part of the mitzvah. So since v'yatzu and madadu are used for those drashot, they can't be used for the number, which is why Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon have the number 3 or the number 5, as we explained. We're going to stop here at the top of Yadad Amud Bet. We'll pick up tomorrow with Yadad Amud Bet, continuing to discuss the halachot of egla, arufa, and Bezat Hashem will pick up tomorrow. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day.